Hey guys, quick book review. This is called Eliminating Self-Defeating Behaviors in Children and the Child at Heart. It's a long title. Anyway, this book is basically a book about, taking down those behaviors of your, within yourself that you just don't like anymore, that you don't want. And in the book, she says, like, how did these behaviors get started? Well, most of them got started because at some point they helped you with something, right? When maybe it was in childhood where, with certain situations, whether it was the bullies at school or a family culture thing, or, a learned behavior in big crowds or something, you started telling yourself a story that had just kind of stuck, and then that behavior became a part of your daily life or your routine in that specific scenario, right? So now how do you get rid of those things that are, as she calls them, SDBs, right? Self-defeating behaviors. She uses a lot of kind of extreme analogies to explain, what it is like to continue hanging on to these things and how to get rid of them, right? But if you could just see it in a very obvious way, clear cut, that if you would eliminate this behavior, on the other side, or your new life without it would definitely be happier and better, right? But we tell ourselves stories to justify it, to keep it around, to hang on to what's familiar with it. I've explained in other videos, like, you grew up in a culture. Every single one of us grew up in a very specific culture, and you learned to navigate that culture to the best of your ability, to what would help you survive it well and connect with the people around you, and just basically be standard. And then, or if you want to be above standard, you're still judged by that culture. So it's like, even if you're exceptional for your group of people, your family, your town, your state, you're still judged by that culture, and it becomes so ingrained that sometimes we don't even, it's very difficult to even see kind of a different angle or a different perspective, right? Well, this is kind of where those self-defeating behaviors come from, because you might be in a new environment or a new stage in life where those behaviors once served you, but they don't anymore, right? She says, suppose you step into an elevator and a man stepped on your foot and did not say something such as, "I'm sorry." How would you feel? Would you feel angry? Suppose you noticed the man was blind and had a prosthetic leg and likely did not know he had stepped on your foot. Now, how would you feel? Would you feel different? Your feelings would probably change. Would your behavior be different as well? Think how you would have behaved before you knew he was blind and had a prosthetic leg. How would you behave differently once you understood? So she says, what happens to us does not determine our actions. It is how we think about what happens to us that determines our feelings, and our feelings determine our actions, right? Before you knew he had a prosthetic leg and was blind, you might have been angry. Like, excuse me? Like, at least apologize, right? Now that you know he's blind with a prosthetic leg, you probably have a sense of, like, empathy or sympathy, like, oh man, this poor fellow's doing his best to get around and accidentally stepped on me, right? Maybe there's something I can help. Let me push the button for you. Like, it's a different scenario. So how we think about what happens to us determines how we feel. How we feel determines our actions. So think about that in so many scenarios. Basically, a major piece of this book, I chose to do my self-defeating behavior. I can choose not to do it. You can tell yourself that over and over. She tells her advice is to write down, like, what your self-defeating behavior is, and then carry around a little, like a little garbage can or something, right? And it's like every time you see yourself, you notice yourself trying to, or starting to go to this self-defeating behavior, put that in your garbage can, and say this, like, I chose to start this, I'm choosing to stop, right? I chose to do this. I'm choosing to not do it anymore. So I'm kind of jumping around, getting ahead of myself, but she says, this concept is important to understand. We chose what we think. What we think determines how we feel, and our feelings in turn determine our actions. What is it you are thinking? Can you think about it differently? What other options are there for ways to think about it? What other feelings would you choose if you thought about it in a different way? If you chose to feel in those different ways, how would your choice of action or behaviors be different? Like, basically, a huge piece of changing a self-defeating behavior is taking accountability for what you believe and who you are and the actions you take, right? Like, people can do things to you, but that doesn't determine how you react. Like, how you react is in your control. What are all the steps you do in order to do your self-defeating behavior? This is so key to changing. Often we don't really realize we're headed down the path to some action until we're already there. And at that point, it's much too late for most of us to stop that behavior. So it's better if you can recognize an established pattern. So like if you, for example, do you tell yourself something without thinking first, such as I always feel uncomfortable in crowds, and then like I may not make a friend, or no one likes me, or no one knows me, I don't know anybody, whatever. And then the next thought is, or the next thing is like, what feelings do you start to have, right? What feelings do you have based on the thoughts? Do you feel anxious? Do you feel angry? Like, you start worrying about things and telling yourself a story, right? So if you can stop it at these phases, it's going to be way less difficult, and you're more likely to actually stop versus waiting until you're starting to do this behavior. She's talking about like fingernail biting, for example, right? Going into this public place, I get anxiety. Oh my gosh, what if I don't have friends there? What if nobody likes me? What if I'm unable to make a friend? Oh man, and then you start feeling certain things because of the story you're telling yourself, right? You feel anxious, you feel this, and then it's like the next step is like start biting those nails. And it's like once you've already started the behavior, you can stop, but you've already built up this emotional state of being that's way more difficult to defeat than the initial phase, right? But you can stop anywhere along the way. It's just it gets more difficult as you go. Make a list of all the ways you do your self-defeating behavior, starting with the thoughts and describing each step along the way. So if you just pick one behavior you don't like, and then, okay, start there and go backwards. List everything that you do associated with it, like before you smoke a cigarette, or I mean, I'm even thinking about things that are a little bit more like kind of thought of as like normal, but they're not helpful, you know. I mean, obviously this would work with things like, you know, a straight up addiction to drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, pornography, whatever. But you can take care of things like this. What's your reaction to your kids when they respond some way? Or as you start getting ready for bed, do you guys go through a drama routine rather than a bedtime routine, right? And so you can stop yourself and tell yourself a different story, like, and you should write all those things down, every step you take. What's the story you tell yourself? What's the feelings you start to get? What do you do next? You know, do you get angry? Do you get frustrated? How do you behave? Well, your behavior and your actions and your feelings and thoughts are all your responsibility. So don't blame your kids. Try to catch yourself as early as possible. At the end, once again, just like the last book I did, I have a big highlighted mark all the way down both pages, because these are basically all the steps laid out in order. And you can use these steps for any behavior that you want to change about yourself. And she has had a fabulous amount of success with this strategy. And even though it kind of targets kids a lot in a lot of ways, she says that she's never had an adult that wanted the adult version, but that this was perfectly fine. And I assume, this is just my own thinking, according to most therapists that I've talked to, and from the therapy that I've had and stuff, it's like, it seems like it frequently goes back to our early stages of life. That's where trauma happens. That's where behaviors start. That's where these cultures that I'm talking about are like become super ingrained, right? And so it's almost like you have to some degree go back there. And so anyway, it's a very helpful book. I think it's super useful. Go check it out. Eliminating Self-Defeating Behaviors in Children and the Child at Heart. I'll put a link so you can purchase from Amazon. When you do that, I get a small commission, so I appreciate that. And otherwise, go check out other book reviews that we have on the website, bronsonwilks.com, and follow our social medias. We'll check you guys later.